Now let's get into infrastructure. The Africa Finance Corporation last week announced the raising of a fresh $400 million in a new syndicated loan to support the post-pandemic recovery through critical development of infrastructure on the African continent. The three-year facility, the first from the AFC since 2018, was increased from an initial target of $300 million US. Banji Fehintola is a senior director and treasurer at the AFC, and he joins me live now on the line to tell us more on this. A good evening to you, sir, and congratulations to you and the AFC team on this syndicated loan raising.
Thank you very much, Watson.
Good to see you. Thank you so much. Yes. Now, tell me, what is the significance of this syndicated loan and the response from the international lenders?
Well, for us at AFC, we are constantly in the capital market. For us, it's about how do we mobilize capital in order to develop the continent. AFC, as you know, has an A3 rating. It's the second highest rated entity on the continent of Africa. And on the back of that, we leverage our rating in order to access capital market for the huge amount of developmental work that is required on the continent, particularly in the COVID era, at a time when we're thinking, how do we get the continent back to work and how do we get all the economies, firing again?
How was this fund, syndicated loan, how was it raised? Who are the key investors? Where are they located? In Africa, elsewhere around the world?
So as part of our funding strategy, diversifying our funding sources is extremely important to us. So we've always been active in the syndicated loan market, albeit the last time we did one of such was in 2018. In the past, we've done transactions out of Asia, we've done transactions out of Korea, from Japan, etc. But, keeping our banking relationships active is extremely important to us. So the real reason for this transaction, was to keep our banking lines active across the globe. We had banks from Africa, we had banks from the Middle East, banks from Asia, banks from Europe, all participating in the transaction. And for us, that's significant because it helps us to, diversify across the entire continent and our banking partners engaged.
But again, the next question, of course, the natural question will be how the proceeds will be used. Are there specific projects or sectors across the continent that you're targeting at the AFC, and where would they be located? Would you be regional buyers? What would be the basis of spreading this $400 million US?
So the 400 is just one out of the many transactions, right, that we've done. Last year, we were active in the bond market, for example. We issued a 750 million euro bond at a coupon of less than 3%, which was the lowest coupon in AFC's history. And for us, what we try to do, especially in a pandemic time, is to ensure that our balance sheet is resilient. We build our liquidity so that we can support all the sectors that we invest in. We primarily invest across, power, transportation, natural resources, heavy industries, telecoms, financial institutions. And across all these sectors, we definitely have a huge pipeline of transactions. And we are actually just shoring up our liquidity so that we can finance projects across all these sectors, across all the countries in Africa. Since our inception till date, we've done close to $10 billion of investments, across 35 African countries. And we're just building on that. We keep diversifying our portfolio and investing across the continent in order to, spur growth and development.
What are you specific about certain projects and why you are so keen about it when you look at what's the objective of investing in infrastructure in Africa, by the way, for the AFC? Why would you want to invest in various projects across the continent? What's the end game here?
So, it's simple. If you look at Africa, the state of our infrastructure, compare that to the rest of the world, you see that Africa is lagging behind, right? In terms of productivity, in terms of GDP, a lot of our GDP growth is actually being eroded by the fact that Africa lacks the basic infrastructure compared to the rest of the world. And that's the reason why we exist, in order to help bridge this huge infrastructure gap on the continent. And in so doing, we can improve the productivity of the continent. And ultimately, I mean, we're talking about a continent that has a significant amount of young people, young population, huge resources, but somehow that hasn't trickled down to the quality of lives of people. So by investing in infrastructure, we are able to unlock a lot of the potentials of Africa, the continent, and hopefully, that trickles down to the way of life, to your life, to my life, and to everybody on the street, and makes Africa even a far better destination for more investments.
One of the bigger conversation around energy is green bond flotation, the climate change, the climate crisis, climate adaptation. You did this bond in 2020. How have the process of this green bond so far been, or sustainable bond been invested so far? Bring me up to speed.
Yeah, so we try to lead the discourse on sustainability on the continent, and I think that's one of the things that we try to do in order to, help the capital evolve. In 2020, shortly, after the pandemic started to abate a bit, we decided to tap the green bond market for the first time. We issued in Swiss francs, million Swiss francs, because again, we have a very strong presence in the Swiss market. We issued a bond, 5-year bond, in the Swiss market. Use of proceeds, funded 2 wind farms and 1 renewable energy. We had projects in Djibouti, projects in Cape Verde, and a project in Cote d'Ivoire that we use the proceeds to fund. But beyond the green bonds, like I said, we try to lead the discourse. As far back as 2015, the first institution to be accredited by the Green Climate Fund, and we keep leading the discourse and opening up the capital markets in this area.
Egypt has just announced the flotation of a green bond. Do you think green bonds are the solution to the environmental issues we currently face on the continent? Is that a path to energy sustainability and help us get more women and children out of the dangers and the downside of using firewood and charcoal and other forms of dirty energies, and get us on that path that puts us at par with the rest of the world? Do you think we're making that scratch? Are we on that same highway with the rest of the world?
So, I mean, compared to the rest of the world, I think we're on the right track, but we're not quite there as a continent with respect to issuing green bonds or any kind of sustainability-linked kind of financing. We all know that Africa is, disproportionately affected by climate change. Lots of continent that I think, qualify as potential green assets. And I think the way we look at this huge pot of liquidity globally, with COP26, with so many of these things happening, looking for a home, looking for the right projects to invest in. And so if you're a developer or you're a company or even an institution like ours, if we can demonstrate to investors the benefit of investing, if we can create these green assets, there's a huge amount of funding, typically even subsidized, which could come into this project. So I definitely agree with you. I think it's the way forward. We need to start thinking beyond just traditional funding and start thinking about where the world is moving. And the world is moving towards all this sustainable type of financing.
So we'll talk about the $400 million current syndication deal you got, and we'll talk about the green. Tell me about other AFC's funding efforts. In particular, look at the 2020 global pandemic, and now you have the outlook on the U.S. interest rate hikes. This U.S. Fed is meeting from tomorrow, announcement on Wednesday. Markets are currently nail-biting as we are having this interview. Inflation, winding down of stimulus. So why are you putting all of this together in your department and the rest of your team and the entire EFC as to how to raise funds moving forward, what will be the cost, what will be the yield on some of these loans you'll be looking at, and how do you think the cost of the dollar you're raising globally could be used locally here on the continent?
Yeah, so you raise very good points. The landscape has changed compared to last year. I mean, with the Fed normalization of monetary policy across not just in the US, but maybe even the rest of Europe and the developed markets. And, potentially that could have implication for capital reversals out of emerging markets. So it's not unexpected. But for an institution like ours, the fact that we have such a fantastic rating, we still see lots of investors interested in Africa anyway. And, so we're quite bullish that despite all the challenges on the horizon, that there's no doubt that people interested in we always look at an institution like AFC as an entry point into their exposure to the continent. And, to surprise you that throughout the pandemic, up till now, those have actually been our biggest success story, in our financing. So as people say, maybe in the midst of crisis, there are opportunities. So we've taken advantage of the opportunities that came with the crisis. We've built significant liquidity buffer and we continue to make inroads. So I think this year is going to be interesting. We have a plan to potentially raise on a net basis at least $2 billion. And I think we would be executing that very actively across instruments, across markets, and hopefully very successfully as well.
How much has the AFC invested in Africa so far, and how do you plan to diversify your investment portfolio this year? Give me that in 1 minute.
Well, like I said, we're almost 15 years old. We've done a lot in those 15 years. We've touched a significant amount of lives on the continent. We've invested close to $10 billion in total, which is significantly higher than most financial institutions. And for a young institution, that's actually a significant number. We've done that over 35 African countries. But more importantly, is not how much we've invested out of our balance sheet. We have a track record of mobilizing between 5 to 9 times the amount of investments that we make. So, when I say we've done 10 billion, we've done significantly more than that in terms of projects that we financed on the continent. And I think that's really what we're set up to do. And other institutions like ours actually should do more of this in order to help Africa to recover from the effects of the pandemic and also to grow sustainably into the future.
Banji Fehintola, Senior Director and Head of Treasury and Finance at AFC. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.